Hello and welcome back to another video. Today here again on Forza Horizon 5 with part 2 of the full F1 calendar built-in event lab. So in part 1 we did all of the tracks from before the summer break, from round 1 in Bahrain to round 12 in Belgium. So today we'll be continuing the rest of the season from after the summer break, from round 13 in the Netherlands all the way to the season finale in Abu Dhabi. So let's get straight into the first route of today's video. For the second half of the season, we're kicking things off with the Dutch Grand Prix at Zandvoort. Although the selection of blueprints for this track wasn't actually great, so it's not the best start to this video. The best one I could find was made out of metal, just like a fair number of the other tracks from the previous installment, but this one's built in the stadium, which is very restrictive on space, so it's like a miniature version, and with no walls or barriers built around it, you can fall off far too easily. It's also built as a sprint, so you're essentially limited to one lap before you cross the finish line. In contrast, for our second route that we're looking at today, we move on to probably the worst blueprint today, to one of the best ones we're going to see, Monza. This one is truly incredible. It's almost perfectly to scale, I would say, with enough props there to make it feel somewhat like the real location, and a smoother surface than a lot of the routes we've looked at. Although tarmac would have been even better, but that may not have been available at the time of building this. My only other complaints are that there's a tree on the start line and a couple of jumps, which are a bit terrifying unless you know they're there and slow down beforehand. But these were probably unavoidable, as you kind of have to build circuits around preset start lines in Forza, so the reason the height change is there is to get down to the road for the start-finish line. So potentially that was the only way it could be done, but overall this is an absolutely stunning route. Next up is Singapore and the Marina Bay Street Circuit, another creation from Embrew, who made a couple of routes seen in part 1. Similarly to both of those, this is again built out of just metal platforms and barriers above the ground, so just like other sky tracks, as I call them, this means you aren't limited by a lap number. You simply drive back down to the ground and cross the finish line that's kind of beyond the route itself when you've had enough of lapping the circuit. For round 16, Suzuka is another amazing creation. It looks absolutely stunning, with the ground made out of actual tarmac pieces, and the whole thing feeling very much like the real circuit. Much like some of the Sky tracks, it's not limited by laps. You simply head to the secondary pit lane to cross the finish line when you've had enough of lapping the circuit. The only problem with that system, which is the same for all of these ones without actual laps, is that you don't get lap times, which is kind of a shame. But given they're kind of built by eye, the laps are never going to be perfectly accurate, so I suppose it doesn't really matter too much. But if we were going to use it for our racing league, for example, we would want lap times. Anyway, the surface itself of this track is also a little bit bumpy, and in some places corner tightness feels a little bit off, so it's probably not quite as accurate as, say, Monza, but I think for the feeling of being in Suzuka, it It is really, really well done. And it doesn't have any trees on the route or jumps or anything. So, yeah, I'm kind of unsure out of those two which is my favourite so far. For round 17, we're moving to Qatar, and this version I found is technically the endurance car version. It was the best route I could find for this circuit, but it's not a track I'm all that familiar with, so I'm not really sure of the differences between the F1 and endurance layout, but they may be the same, and I'm also not sure how accurate the layout it is at all. It does look stunning though, even if it is basically just barriers and lights, and of course the roading and dirt, but the effect of so few props is really, really good. And if you open up photo mode particularly, it looks absolutely stunning, and it will put any hardware that you're running the game on through its paces. It seemed to really struggle with this one. The only problem with it really is that I couldn't actually complete a lap. No matter what I tried to do, the final checkpoint wouldn't register, which I suppose means you could do as many laps as you like, but again, no lap times, and you'd have to quit out when you'd had enough, so you wouldn't receive any of the rewards. Not that that's really an issue in Forza, but yeah, it's kind of a shame for a route that's so beautiful that it doesn't quite work. But this is a problem with a lot of things in Event Lab, unfortunately. Anyway, next we move from Qatar to Kota. The Circuit of the Americas is another sky track built out of metal platforms. This one, though, has wooden runoff areas, as well as the usual barriers and stands, of course. Just like previous tracks of this style, you simply drive into the pit lane to finish the event when you've had enough. I know some of them you drive back down to the ground, but yeah, limitless laps and exit when you've had enough, same sort of style. There was actually another version of Kota from another creator, built out of tarmac platforms, so the grip was slightly better from the ground, I suppose, so in that way it was slightly more realistic. But it was another sky track, and most of it had no walling, so you would literally fall from the sky if you got a corner wrong. So, probably best to use this blueprint. Next, we have another stunning blueprint. There are really so many great ones in today's second half of the F1 season video. This time it's Mexico, which of course, given this game's location, was quite hard to search for because millions of things are labelled as Mexico. So I had to put the name of the track itself in rather than Mexico. Anyway, this is the route that I found, another above ground one, but this time made of tarmac and not metal. And it seemed pretty accurate, and with some kind of props to give a sort of background and make it feel more like you're at the real location, I think it's been done really well, because you want to do it with as few as possible to not make particularly older hardware struggle, because if you use the same prop lots of times, it doesn't affect limit as much. But yeah, it's kind of a balance between putting enough there to make it feel like the location and not putting too much, basically. It even has a pit lane with a speed limit sign, this route. There's just so many details, and I think it's been done really, really well. Anyway, being another sky track means there's no lap counter, you can do as many as you want, but it does also mean no lap times. You simply drive back down when you want to exit. But yeah, I think this one is also stunning. Then on to what used to be the season finale, Brazil. This by the same creator as Albert Park that we saw in part 1, although this is clearly an older build than that one. This one again built out of metal platforms and barriers, but this time also making use of some of the in-game roads, so it's not quite as good as Australia, just not quite as well polished, but it was probably built before things like the tarmac pieces even existed, so it is quite interesting to see some of these routes that are built by the same creator, but clearly much older, to see how they've kind of progressed and improved with Event Lab. So yeah, go back and check out the Australia one if you haven't already to see how it compares. But yeah, this is still a pretty good one in terms of the route itself, but yeah, it's a bit bumpy, particularly where you go from the platforms to road and back up again. For round 21, I wasn't sure what I would actually find for Las Vegas, as it's brand new to the real calendar this year, I think. But I did end up discovering quite a good blueprint in the end. I'm not sure about accuracy, because I'm not really too familiar with the route they're going to use in Las Vegas, but the ground is made of tarmac and is nice and smooth. The barriers and curbing is very well done, and there's a backdrop of skyscrapers, and that, with the additional lighting and stuff, does make it feel very much like a city circuit. But the only problem I kind of have is that they've only used the prefabricated buildings, so it makes it a bit generic. Some kind of landmark from Las Vegas would have been good to see, because I think it is going to be kind of in the centre. Basically what I'm saying is, driving around here, apart from the layout, there's no way of knowing that this city is Las Vegas, because all the buildings are very similar. Having said that though, the overall feel and the build quality on this route is very, very good. So yeah, I was pleasantly surprised by this route, because I really didn't know what I was going to find for Las Vegas. And what other way to finish off the F1 season than with another creation from The Filthy Honey, also the creator of Baku from Part 1, which was probably the best track in that episode. This is clearly a much older project though, from very early on in the game's lifespan, still built out of metal and such rather than tarmac like Baku was. It is still stunning though, and pretty accurate to reality as far as I can tell. I can also tell you that the bit where the sort of orangey lights are on, I think it's the hotel in reality, did used to be blue in Event Lab, but it got changed colour quite early on for some reason. So yeah, that's why it's a slightly different colour to reality. But imagine that's blue. And it even features the under the track pit lane, this route, but you do get reset from missing a checkpoint before you get that far, so I can't really show it. And just like Baku, it has an activatable DRS, which I think I forgot to mention on that route. Both of these, the Filthy Honey creations, do have a DRS option, but I've not been able to activate it yet, because you need to be within a second of the car in front, just like in reality, but really cleverly programmed in. And given how early on this was built, to have figured out the way of like programming rule sets for Event Lab has been really, really well done. This blueprint is only 3 laps and is restricted to track toys, but driving this Vulcan around here was absolutely incredible. Oh, and there's also a daytime blueprint if you would prefer that. And that is going to bring an end to today's video, looking at the second half of the Formula 1 calendar in Event Lab here on Forza Horizon 5. If you haven't already, do make sure to go and check out part 1, where we looked at all of the tracks from before the summer break. But yeah, what a way to end with that stunning recreation of Abu Dhabi. But that is going to be all for today's video, so thank you very much for watching, and I'll be back with the next one very soon.